Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. Costin here with a discussion about Elves in Total War Warhammer 3 Immortal Empires, both High Elves and Dark Elves. We could also talk about Wood Elves, but not necessarily for the purposes of this video. Though I would say Wood Elves are certainly a very strong race. Their gameplay style does fit them in the lore, so it's very appropriate, but it's also pretty boring, honestly, to play a Wood Elf campaign as you're just steamrolling everything. But that's a discussion for another time. For this video, I want to talk about how the High Elves need a rework, because they do, even though they are one of the most powerful races in the game. And the Dark Elves don't. And I would dare say, like, the Dark Elves are the stronger race right now, though maybe with more limited late game potential than the High Elves. Because the differing styles between the two races are such that High Elves may start out slow, but they build up to extraordinary power in a campaign in the long term, whereas Dark Elves, they start out very strong, but they just don't have that kind of level of scalability. That isn't to say things are great for the High Elves. Again, very strong race. How strong of a race? Well, their basic roster of spearmen and archers are quite capable of dealing with everything that you're going to have to face in a campaign, minus certain opponents that may have a lot of heavily armored units, but even then you can handle it, because there's ways to play around that, and those kind of factions like Warriors of Chaos will not necessarily have many armies, so just recruit another one. Now, I personally do prefer to use archers with light armor, better auto-resolve result, better resistance to both melee and ranged attacks, but there's quite a few people who will argue you're just wasting your money. I mean, I personally don't believe so. I mean, it's just 12 gold upkeep difference, which is not really worth it all that much. But an army made up of 4 spearmen, maybe even 6, but 4 to 6 spearmen and the rest made up of high elven archers will be capable of dealing with pretty much everything. But it is really boring to play again and again. You position yourself in terrain where you have an advantage, where the enemy can't flank you easily, if at all, or corner camp, and then you use your vast range power to obliterate a significant portion of an enemy army before they even reach you. And if they do reach you, well, you can either retreat if you can, or you can duke it out. The only concern in a High Elven campaign in battles is not even the enemy, it's running out of ammunition. Understand, the High Elves are so durable with their basic units in battle that they will sooner run out of ammunition than run out of men. And there are ways around that, because you can get 20% more ammunition through precise fletching and even more missile strength. So their power is there. And on top of that, they have some really powerful lore choices: archmages, princes, and princesses. The real benefit over here is using the influence system to get lords that have various traits. Things like efficient to reduce the upkeep even further, or strong combat abilities, mages that have more magical ability than other mages in the entire game. And then on top of that, not only do they have powerful magical abilities, but they also ride freaking dragons. Like moon dragons, to be sure, which aren't necessarily the best in the game, but yeah, still pretty damn powerful when you consider the outcome of that. I mean, it's not a star dragon, but certainly a moon dragon is quite capable. So, like, genuinely an Archmage Lord, and this is fairly unique for High Elves in the game, an Archmage Lord with a moon dragon can really be devastating melee, even though they don't have the melee skill line. The only other caster Lord that can do something similar in terms of melee combat ability is like Chaos Dwarves. And let me be blunt, Chaos Dwarves are a very powerful race, but they don't work with just an army of their very basic units, whereas the High Elves do. But there are problems with High Elves, a lot of issues that make them less interesting to play. Like, there's a great variety between the Legendary Lords, though I would certainly say Teclis is pretty pathetic as a campaign. I have to dare say that, like, if he's not even getting wiped out, which he has in this particular campaign, and the vast majority of campaigns I do play in this game. Like, literally, if you want to use Teclis, you're probably best off using the Recruit Defeat the Legendary Lords mod. So Teclis is a shame. I think Guild has showcased how you can do a caster Lord, a caster Legendary Lord done in a very good fashion. Hell, Morathi is a caster Legendary Lord, and she's extraordinary as a powerhouse. But yeah, Teclis is pretty pathetic. Starting position, just campaign situation limitations that do come from the race. But what are those limitations? Well, the unique racial mechanic that the elves have is influence, and I'll be blunt, it's boring as dirt. Because you use influence for two things. You use influence to recruit powerful lords and heroes with extra traits, because if you don't use influence to recruit any of them, you're going to get negative traits, which is annoying. So you're having to fight battles to build up influence to recruit lords and heroes that have some kind of positive trait as opposed to a negative one. That is, to begin with, pretty annoying to deal with in a campaign. There's a lot of power in it, but it's like it does limit your potential. In fact, one of the things you're really well situated to do in a high elf campaign is actually just play one campaign, save a bunch of lords and heroes with good traits at level 1 when you recruit them. I'd recommend Alfarian. He works very well with this because he gets a lot of influence from the beginning of his campaign. Save those characters and then load them up in another campaign and makes them better. But yeah, that's how meaningless the mechanic is. As for influencing diplomatic relations with factions, can be useful to be certain, but at the same time, it's not exciting. I mean, consider Karl Franz, who also has gotten this mechanic, though certainly to a more limited extent. Like, the idea is like, oh, you can provoke wars between factions and all that. It just feels so redundant. Like, I almost never use influence unless I'm wanting to build good diplomatic relations with someone for the sole purpose of confederation. For no other reason is it worth to use influence for this system. So this system, rather meaningless. Karl Franz has it to a more limited extent, of course, but he has a lot more things right now. So yes, Karl Franz is better at being an elf than the actual elves in his campaign. But on top of that, with the elves, when you're looking at the racial mechanics, they actually had one of them removed. One of the things that the elves could do would be to get trade agreements and get vision with their trading partners, spies, basically. Well, that mechanic has been removed from the High Elves. And the reason they did that, I'm fairly certain that they did this is the speculation, is that they did it to make Jan Bo look better. Ultimately, because they gave him that mechanic. So they had said before that they were going to remove it. Okay, fair enough. But clearly, like, come on. They didn't remove it with the SOC as opposed to leaving it in the game up until that point for no other reason than they want to make Jan Bo seem more special. So you end up you end up with a race that actually had one of their main benefits, if you will, actually removed from them entirely, which is frustrating to say about them. Another thing is their research tree, and it's awful. The reason it's awful is because you require different structures to unlock various things. This has never been great in Total War at any point in the history of Total War. Like, you start with military advancements 1 from the beginning, but then it's like, oh, you get an archive. Let me tell you what an archive does. An archive, the sole freaking reason you get an archive in a campaign where you start with a mage, and Tyrion starts with a mage, Alifanar starts with a mage, Emmerich starts with a mage, so 3 campaigns already start with a mage. The only reason you get this building is just to unlock military advancements too. Beyond that, at tier 3, it has absolutely no purpose. No unit recruitment purpose, and if you have a mage already, no hero recruitment purpose. So it's just a waste of almost 4,000 gold just to unlock the research tree. That is frustrating. And this continues on. Oh, you want these various resource benefits? Okay, fair enough. Like, let's put that in. But the thing is, you don't just get research. You can't just unlock things that simple. No, you gotta get the Elven Embassy to get trade advancements. So another tier 3 structure, though this one actually has a value because it increases your trade tariffs. Okay. Oh, you want cultural advancements? Enjoy doing that, because if we look at cultural advancements for the High Elves, you not only need 1 building, but actually 2 buildings over there. So you need Elven Court and a Shrine of Asuryan. And let me say, Shrine of Asuryan, completely worthless building at tier 3. Elven Court, obviously more useful, but again, you're building something just for a sole purpose of unlocking the research tree. Frustrating. So research tree, pretty damn awful with respect to that. Unit recruitment, going into that further. Oh, actually, let me talk about something that's good about the Elves, though it has its own issues. That's trade, yes. Elves rely on trade. The reason is they can produce the most income from trade by any faction in the entire game, though I'm pretty sure dwarves are giving them a run for their money at the moment with the way they've been reworked. But elves, through their main economic building that goes up to tier 3 and produces 300 income by default, also produces 12 elven trinkets. You will never have enough trading partners to sell all your trinkets, so a portion of these will be wasted, but you're going to get a lot of money from it. Now, kind of annoyingly, when you have 100 control, your income is boosted to 150. This is what I mean by elves scaling up. Annoying about this particular aspect when you're looking at an elven campaign, with respect to this, what's annoying with respect to this is like getting 100 control is certainly very viable in an elven campaign, but you're certainly not going to get this easily in an elven province. Another issue is that in order to increase your control and even boost your income to a reasonable level, because you won't have it at the reasonable level even with a lot of trading partners, is you need to get the promenade, which gives you control, gives you that extra income from the building. And this is a second income building. I've certainly soured on the idea of multiple income buildings. Like, it's like, oh, you build 2 buildings that give you money. That's exciting. Okay, one's a controlled building. Great. Because we have just one building for that, and put the control somewhere else, like maybe, I don't know, the Elven Embassy. Just an idea, just a fear. Or maybe slice the control in the Elven Gardens, because, like, yeah, they give you entertainment building income, but maybe just take that benefit of control, put an income benefit there, lower, because it is pretty high, and just, yeah, have that. Just an idea on my level personally. Okay, unit recruitment. There's a lot of good units in the Elven roster, but you never will use them. The reason you won't use them, again, archers and spearmen are really good, so what's the point in recruiting anything else to begin with? Because Warhammer 3's meta is built around the idea of building a lot of armies and conquering as much territory with those armies as possible. Sure, you would want heroes, you would want artillery, but outside of that, like high elven archers with light armor and spearmen will do well. Later on, you might get a couple of silver in guard, and that's it. Like, that is it. There's no point in recruiting Shadow Warriors, which are just better archers, and they're not even necessarily that better, because if you look at archers, right, you look at damage they're doing compared to, like, actually, let me just look at this from the unit and spell browser. If we look at Elven Archers, they do 17 damage, but then we look at Shadow Warriors, which are available to all of them. Shadow Walkers are exclusive to Olifanar. We look at Shadow Warriors, yeah, they're better units, though they have less armor, but they can shoot while moving. Some issues with respect to that. But same range, just a bit more damage, less ammunition, which, as I've mentioned, the problem elves have in battles is actually running out of ammunition. So, yeah, not really a great upgrade, and certainly more expensive to recruit, quite a bit more expensive. Like 80 more upkeep actually does matter when you're talking about an entire army. Like, you can do it, certainly, like this is what I'm building up towards here, Shadow Walkers and Shadow Warriors. You can certainly make it work, but it's certainly a very inefficient use of your resources in a lot of ways. And kind of not worth it unless you're playing a Olifanar, and only really worth it because, yeah, Shadow Walkers have poison attacks and actually do more damage, though they take 2 turns to recruit. Again, exclusive to Olifanar's campaign, because Shadow Warriors are a DLC unit, but they put Olifanar as a free lord, so they had to give him something unique. So that's where Shadow Walkers come in. But outside of that, what's the point in recruiting cavalry? Maybe 1 unit of skirmish cavalry, and the only reason you're recruiting that is that until your mages are on a flying mount, you want to get a unit of cavalry to get the enemy to attack you. Let's say you're attacking an enemy army, they're going to be on the defensive, you want to lure them to attack you, a unit of skirmish cav will do that. But that's it. Getting silver helms, getting anything until tier 4 is not worth it, with the exception of Eagle Claw bolt throwers. And the sole reason these guys are worth it is until you get like good mounts for your lords, it's the only way you're going to get siege attacker in your faction. But they actually are bad at sieges. They're not great in field battles, but the reason they're not great in field battles is because they're a sustained damage unit. They don't do as much damage as other artillery, so they need to shoot constantly at the AI. Well, one, the AI is not going to let you do that so easily. It's certainly not on higher difficulties. Like, if you're playing on very hard battle difficulty, it's going to be hard actually getting any value from these guys. Certainly nowhere near the value of artillery from other races. And for sieges, yeah, they don't do a lot of damage to walls and towers, so it's like, yeah, shitty artillery option. I mean, it's a way to silence some of the towers, absolutely, to destroy 1 tower or 2 to allow your archers to kill everything in sight. That's also what's awful about elves. Their siege tactics are miserable. And then later on, yeah, also the fact you're getting this from an Elven Forge, which is a tier 3 unit, that you're only doing it for that, like, yeah, you can go for flavor, but you don't need any of the other units. The only reason you might get anything else is for the sake of flavor. That's it. Or maybe if you need a lot of armor piercing in your armies, you might go for Sisters of Avalorn, but like with Shadow Warriors, very expensive unit, though certainly a lot more powerful because they have those armor piercing attacks and magical attacks and flaming attacks. But that's roughly it. The biggest issue with the Elven roster is the following. You can only recruit, unless you're playing Alariel, you can only recruit one type of hero, and only one hero, unless you're talking about Emmerich, to an extent Telfarian, but that's because of a landmark, not because he can do it. But if you're playing an Elven campaign, the only way to recruit heroes is to get a noble at tier 2. That is it. That is all the heroes you're going to use beyond your starting hero, and the noble you can get early on. Emmerich has his skill line that gives him more noble capacity, so you will have more of them, but that's just it. Just one hero type beyond the starting hero you go for. And if you lose that starting hero, good luck replacing him. Everything else isn't locked until tier 3. It's locked until tier 4. Noble capacity is locked until tier 4. Handmaidens until tier 4, unless you're playing Alariel who gets them at tier 3. Okay, Alariel has more handmaidens than anyone else, but that's like the thing. The race in itself has very significant limitations on hero capacity. Alariel doesn't have that limitation, but yeah, she still has limited mages. She has limited nobles. She has limited lore masters of hope. These are awesome heroes, by the way. Like, all of these are awesome heroes, but very powerful heroes, but you're so severely limited. And Alariel's campaign ends up being broken because she gets more handmaidens than anyone else combined, and because being able to get heroes at tier 3 means she can build them in minor settlements through her special structure. And she's also not wasting a building that's not worth for anything other than that. Like, the only value of this building is like Sisters of Avalorn and handmaidens. That is it. So yeah, like, what's the point in bothering? Like, eventually late on, you will get a lot of heroes, sure, but by that point, you've won your campaign and the grinding begins. Another issue with regards to all of this is your victory condition. Your short campaign victory condition does give you hero capacity. The problem is, some short campaign victory conditions are better than others. For Leafanar to destroy Malekith for a short campaign victory condition, absolutely fine. For Tyrion, not so good. That's a pretty miserable situation. So yeah, campaign victory conditions need to be improved. Long campaign victory conditions, I would dare say, need to be improved as well. Because, like, having to go all the way here to chase down Ragarth to win your long campaign victory condition is brutal. Like, you're not doing it for any other reason, just that campaign victory. So that's not great. A solution to the hero limitation certainly is to play an Elven campaign, specifically Emmerich's campaign, maybe on very low difficulty, and go all the way to Tamarkan, get a bunch of lords with influence, as low level as possible to load them up in every other Elven campaign, because it does work. Like, if you're playing one campaign of one race, you can load them up. Like, Tamarkan can actually load lords in his own campaign that have his defeat rate. It's pretty broken, but it does work because he's an Urgle faction, can play as Kugaf, get the defeat rate, all that. So just an example over there. Do it in the Realms of Chaos. But yeah, you can improve the hero capacity by abusing a defeat rate. And that's not great to begin with. I mean, there's exploiting, there's cheating, but then there's cheating, suffice to say. And even then, you still have to wait until tier 3 or tier 4 to get these heroes, to even recruit them, let alone the limitations on capacity. So yeah, you would get more nobles than you could conceivably deal with, but you'd still have the limitations on mages, you'd still have the limitations because you would require tier 3 building all the same. At least it would make building the archive far more useful if you're using that defeat rate. So those are kind of the issues. And it's like, you look at the roster over here. What do I think Elves need? I think they need a wall breaker unit, really. Like, just a unit to be good at breaking walls. They do have an ability for their rights over here, for the Invocation of Val, though it has a 30-turn cooldown, so yay, great. We use it once, we use it for 10 turns, and then we lose it. That's the thing, the cooldowns of a lot of these rights, and not just for the Elves, for other races as well, are very, very long. Powerful when you do have them, but yeah, a bit too long, because you might use it twice in a campaign, for instance. 3 times if you're going for a longer campaign. Not particularly great. Beyond that, like, why would I ever recruit Phoenix Guard? Why would I ever recruit Arcane Phoenix? And my point to make in all of this is not that any of these units are bad. They're not, but they're not available. And this is the difference I would want to make with, say, the Dwarf rework or the Empire rework, in that you get a lot more viability to use different types of units, far more so than you did before. And that's fun, that's interesting. It's not about power. Again, the elves are powerful. It's just like variety is the spice of life, really. So those are the kind of things I would change for the elves, just to make them more interesting. Give them some campaign mechanic, like some people have modded the Cast Dwarf Conclave system for the High Elves. It would make perfect sense. There's plenty of ideas out there, and I do hope Creative Assembly does improve the elves, and also improves Techless, and improve the victory conditions. Like, Tyrion's campaign is fine as it is, but yeah, like, just, he needs a better victory condition. That would be my perspective. And maybe something unique for his campaign, just as well. But really good campaign if you're a star player. Let's move on to the Dark Elves. On the polar opposite, we have the Dark Elves, best represented by Morathi, though she's a bit of a special Dark Elven campaign. Special in the sense she has Slaaneshi corruption and all the benefits that come with that. Special in the sense that her Lord effects are very, very strong, and her faction as well has some fairly significant benefits in her campaign. Now, this is where I'm sure a lot of people will disagree with me in the community, especially the Warhammer 2 players, because a lot of people liked how the Dark Elves worked in Warhammer 2, and they didn't like, and still don't like, the way the Dark Elves work in Warhammer 3. Why is that? It comes down to one simple thing: slaves. See, slaves have been part of the Dark Elves since they were introduced in Warhammer 2, but the way they changed them did not go down well with large segments of the community. Because one, it makes people feel like, oh, we're constantly going to have to chase for slaves. You do, but Creative Assembly has stated openly in a recent QA that, yeah, Total War is built on aggressive warfare. You want to play more passively? Total War is not built for that, and certainly the Dark Elves are not built for that. So that's something worth mentioning. That's the reason it didn't go down so well. One of the reasons. The other reason, the more important one, I dare argue beyond that, is the fact that what you would do in a Dark Elven campaign in Warhammer 2 is you would get a bunch of slaves, put them all together in a couple of provinces or even one province, put a lot of heroes in that province, and make insane levels of income in the late game. Now, for my part, I didn't ever much care for this. The first campaign I finished in Warhammer 2 on Legendary, in the Vortex campaign, was the Dark Elves. It was the first campaign I started playing as Malekith. Yes, Malekith. I also finished a campaign as Tyrion at about the same time, but still. So I've been playing a lot of Elves ever since they came out in Warhammer 2. And it has to be said that both Dark Elves and High Elves have been two of the best races that Creative Assembly ever built. It just, well, because of the meta of Warhammer 3 versus 2, focused on more armies, more aggression, High Elves have fallen behind, whereas Dark Elves have not. In fact, I dare say that the way they improved them in Warhammer 3 was actually a great thing. Because yes, they lowered the late game economic potential, but they made the early game economic potential of the Dark Elves significantly stronger. You're a faction that by tier 3 can earn 700 income, and all you need to pay for it is 25 slaves per turn. That is one of the highest incomes in the game, by far. Like, genuinely, by far, in terms of like raw economic potential. The only faction that could generate more is Bretonnia, and Bretonnia has drawbacks with respect to this. You don't. And then, because people were not satisfied with the way slaves worked when Warhammer 3 Immortal Empires came out, they changed it with the release of the Cast Dwarfs by basically copying and pasting things from the Cast Dwarfs. They also copy and pasted things from Slaanesh, like actually Cast Dwarfs are using Slaaneshi mechanics as well for the labor actions. Slaanesh doesn't use slaves, but it's the idea of having in every province, you don't have the fancy menu as either Slaanesh or Dark Elves as the Cast Dwarfs do, but you do have dictats in every province, and these dictats are incredibly powerful. You can get 50 growth, which is gigantic. You can get 10 control, which is important because slaves, when you have a lot of them, do affect your level of control. Though now it's a global effect as opposed to province by province effect. And then, yeah, you can print money. Though there is a cooldown, and when you activate like Slave Drive for 5 turns, you won't be able to use another Dictat or something like that. You can print money every turn though, but it is costly in terms of slaves. You gain slaves by fighting battles, sacking settlements, or looting and occupying settlements. So Dark Elves are in a sense like the Greenskins or Skaven in the sense, or even Chaos Dwarves in the sense they don't so much build it up, they tear it down and rebuild it from scratch pretty quickly because, again, they have a lot of growth. And it's not just the dictats, it's also the fact that they have, of course, a growth building that goes all the way up to 55 growth. And they have other benefits as well in their campaign, like one of the first research you would get would be 10 growth faction-wide. So Dark Elves are good from that perspective. Point of disagreement between myself and quite a lot of people in the community, to be sure, but really powerful. And you can also use slaves for instant construction, which for any race in the game would be exceptionally powerful. Kind of sad that the dwarves didn't get it. I think it would have worked for Oath Gold. But yeah, you end up with tons and tons of units, high quality units from the very beginning. You don't have, as the Dark Elves, the same level of power, nor near the same level of power at tier 1 that the High Elves do. But what you do have is versatility, because you can unlock a lot of units fairly quickly, and that makes your armies more versatile. You can go from Dread Spears to Dark Shards to Blackheart Corsairs at tier 3 from a settlement, but you don't use settlements so much for recruitment because you only have 2 recruitment slots. You can improve it a bit, but what you use for the sake of recruitment are Black Arcs. Limited in number, but boy do they have a lot of benefits. And unlike the Ogres, who rely on their camps for the same thing, for recruitment, you don't have to rely on Black Arcs for the sake of recruitment. You can recruit units from regular buildings, just limited slots, recruitment slots, and no global recruitment capacity. Black Arcs are a benefit. They replace your global recruitment with Black Arc recruitment, so pros and cons with that. They can attack naval, coastal settlements, unlike Ogre camps who can't freaking move. Limited number, but you can, like if you lose a Black Arc, you can get it back, no problem. So, not really an issue. And the Black Arcs are actually led by Lords, so yeah, the Dark Elves are in many ways the way the Ogre should be. Furthermore, beyond the instant construction, the insane level of growth, the insane level of money, though they don't have the scalability long-term as the Elves, but let me tell you, between having to get 100 control in a province for maximum income and a lot of trading partners as opposed to just having that income being given to you as a player, yeah, I'd rather have the baseline income. That's one of the reasons I believe the Dark Elves don't need the rework. But beyond that, they get a lot of heroes, not just because they can recruit a lot of heroes very easily because, yeah, they grow settlements very quickly, so sack settlements, rebuild them quickly, not too expensive, not too horrible, and you don't have to worry about the same control issues. Morathi in particular is good with this because a lot of slaves will affect your control, but hey, in Morathi's campaign, you get Death Hags, which are your replenishment hero from a tier 3 building that gives you control, so that's great, and also gives you Slaash Corruption for other benefits as well. The drawback in Morathi's campaign is she's the only Dark Elven campaign where you have one hero and the least useful, that's the Mechanite Assassin, least useful in the sense it's a melee ranged hybrid hero, doesn't do a lot of damage. The Witch Hunter, basically, of the Dark Elves. Not that mobile, doesn't necessarily do a lot of damage. So more useful, I would argue, in some ways than the Witch Hunter. Though, with a reskill, probably about the same. But you can only increase the capacity, or you can only recruit them at tier 4, because there is another tier to this building from which you would recruit both of them at tier 3, both Death Hags and Mechanite Assassins, in every other Elven campaign. You can get Demonettes, worthless, but Death Hags, Control, Slaash Corruption, very worth it, not a problem. And look, Demonettes are not bad units, it's just like they're very low armor, then they suck in the Slashy campaign because you don't have good replenishment. Man, a Dark Elven campaign where you do have good replenishment, yeah, let's just say it's a much better situation. Very good unit in that respect. They'll tear a lot of things to shreds. You have good infantry. Really good infantry in some cases, if we're talking about that. Though, if there is a particular problem, I would dare say with the Dark Elves, like, yeah, Black Arcs work. You do have limited artillery because Reaper bolt throwers are still bolt throwers and you actually need them in the Dark Elven campaign as opposed to a High Elven one, because not just because Siege Attacker, but also because in a High Elven campaign you can outrange everything, pretty much everything, except like Wood Elves and long range artillery options for which you have magic to deal with from your lords or flying lords. But in a Dark Elven campaign, yeah, you can get flying lords, but you will kind of need these to be able to deal with the range massive enemy units. Pretty solid, though. Pretty solid units. I'd say they're better than bolt throwers, but that's just my personal perspective on the matter. Could be wrong on that. Dark Elves also have a benefit where in battle, with a lot of casualties, they'll get a lot more combat ability. So High Elves have a benefit where they get the benefit early on, martial prowess as it's called. But then later on, Dark Elves get the murderous prowess, and they get a lot of melee attack, armor piercing missile damage, leadership, and vigor per second, if we're talking about different kinds of units. So a significant level of power over there, and vigor benefits as well. So lots of benefits over there with respect to the Dark Elves in battle. The only downside is that, yeah, their monster units aren't particularly great, and a lot of the high-end units are just not really worth it. Like, I almost never recruit Blackguard or Black Dragons. But that's just the meta of Warhammer 3 in general. It's not necessarily worth recruiting a lot of the Tier 5 units, unless possibly they're Thunder Barges, and even then there's an argument on that subject. Unless you absolutely need them. And the thing is, a lot of the very high-end units of the Dark Elves are just not particularly that exciting. Like, ooh, Blackguard of Nagron, Hargonef Executioners, great stuff. The Shrine might be good, but you got Medusa at Tier 3. What's great, though, beyond the growth, is you got a lot of heroes. Masters at Tier 2, increasing capacity at Tier 2. You have more heroes than everyone besides Skaven, and to an extent, no, besides Skaven and Greenskins. You have the most hero capacity in the game by default. That's a much better situation than a victory condition that requires you. Like, you get recruit rank benefits and income from slaves for long campaigns. So note the difference. Like, the victory conditions may not be great in Dark Elven campaigns. In fact, they can be outright terrible, but they are nowhere near as important in a Dark Elf campaign as they are in a High Elven campaign. They could use some better stuff in the end game, or easier access to that stuff, or reasons to use it. They could use better victory conditions in all of their campaigns, but that's really it. Like, beyond that, and maybe some better artillery, but that's about it. Elves are strong. Dark Elves are strong. They are versatile. They have a great economy. They're not hated by any faction except High Elves, and, well, you have to wipe them out anyway. Like, you can make a global alliance if you're playing campaign as any Dark Elven Legendary Lord. You can ally a lot of factions, including Empire, Bretonnia, Chaos, because factions dislike you to an extent or another, especially Order factions. Like, it's minus 40, but minus 40 aversion is manageable. Whereas if you're playing a High Elven campaign, the Master Diplomats, you actually have far more limited diplomatic potential. Sure, you can use influence, but at escalating cost, and you need it for heroes. You know what? I think High Elves could use the ability of recruiting more units. Variety for influence. Like, you know, have some influence, like, oh, let's recruit some cavalry from Illyrian, or some mage units, or, you know, lore masters from Sapphire or something like that, if you own those elements, or, you know, different mechanics. Kind of like how the Empire does it, but yeah, using influence as a system could be an idea. Just throwing it out there. Lore choices, not necessarily the most exciting. What's great about Morathi, though, in particular, is, like, she gets mage recruitment through a skill line that's very easy to unlock. Like, really freaking easy. Rank 6, and you can unlock it, basically. Though you do need the skill points, but still, like, really damn powerful for that kind of stuff. So more heroes than the vast majority of factions, more variety than the vast majority of factions, great economy, great campaign design, instant construction, and significant province-wise benefits. Like, yeah, Dark Elves are a good race. I understand some people may not like their design, fair enough. But, like, I would never say no to an improvement, but this is one of the last races in the game that needs any kind of improvement, outside of tweaking certain things, perhaps. That's my view. Though, you know, I think some people exaggerate how bad slaves can be, because it's not really an issue. I played a lot of Dark Elven campaigns, and yeah, you know, you can run out of slaves if you screw up, or if you go too aggressively, but it's not really an issue. I do actually dislike it in how certain mods, including, like, SFO and Radius, it's like they just give you tons of slaves for... They just lower these requirements, make it far less painful. Especially Radius. Not quite sure about SFO, but, like, yeah, Radius does that. And not great, really, because it's not really painful. It's extremely beneficial as is. So this is one of the races where Creative Assembly really did a great job. Like, they were good in Warhammer 2. They reworked them in their economy mainly in Warhammer 3, the dictats, the slaves, all that. They reworked that, and they're one of those races that they did a great job on. Mission complete, mission accomplished, nothing else is needed. They work just fine as it is. We'll never say no to more improvements, undeniably so, but, I mean, job done. That's all I had to say. Costin here, signing out. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and enable notifications. Stay tuned for more.